Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Dropped Frames. I'm JP McDaniel, not joined by Co because he's sick, but we got Budget
I thought I
Ninja.
was
Is that
Co.
what's your who are you again?
I'm Co Carnage.
You're Co Carnage. You're Co Carnage.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
No, you're much nicer than he is.
I'm Scissorin. My name is Scissorin.
Okay, all right. We're happy. I guess we'll let you be here for a little while longer. I don't know how you snuck into the call, but I thought you were Ninja. I thought we were gonna get the big views, but I'm glad you're here. I guess we'll take what we can get. And then of course we're joined by Chris Wilson from Path of Exile. Chris, how's it going? Can you hear us? Are we good? Did we get everything sorted out?
Yes, I think we're good. Thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Thanks for being here as well. You guys are obviously getting ready to launch this big league on Friday, so I appreciate your time more than I think we all appreciate your time being here because it's got to be a little crazy over there. And I guess that's where we can kind of just jump straight into this interview. Like, what your 48-ish hours from league launch? What's the minute to minute like in the office? Is it calm and quiet? Are you guys running around with your heads cut off? Like, what does that look like right now?
Our team really likes to tweak stuff right until the last minute, so there's still everyone's got their bucket list of things they want to change or improve with Betrayal before it goes live, and so there's quite a lot of different stuff still getting iterated on. And I suspect that's a process where based on community feedback, when they get a chance to play it, we'll continue to make tweaks and changes. And so yeah, it's still super busy at the office.
What are we talking, like small changes? Are we talking big changes? Like how much actual work can be done at this point? Is it up until like the last minute till you guys flip the servers live, or where are we talking about in terms of the amount of work that can be put into it?
And it's up until about 4 or 5 hours beforehand because we have to upload the final build and so on. But yeah, there's still changes happening that are quite reasonable. And that's partly because we now get a chance to see everything having come together and get a chance to play it with fresh eyes and basically get the new user experience and think, is the tutorialization good enough? Do we need to make anything clearer and so on? And so the last couple of days are a really good opportunity to kind of put some polish on it and make sure that all of the things have been thought of.
And over time, considering all the previous launches, are launches getting easier or are they getting harder, or more stressful because there's so much more stuff?
I'd say more stressful. This is a very big release, probably too big for us to do in the cycle time that we had available. I mean, we've done it, which is awesome, but it's it's certainly a big one and probably slightly overscoped for our regular 13-week schedule. It's one of the things we would have tried to do in 26 weeks before, and so it's awesome that we've pulled it together. But I suspect that especially if we're going to hit 4.0 in 2020, then it's important for us to not make them quite this large every single cycle in the future.
To kind of take a step back, can you kind of talk about what your actual role is on the Path of Exile team and what your day to day is like normally, not 2 days before a patch, but kind of everything that you oversee in the offices, so to speak?
So I'm one of the founders of the company, and out of the Chris, Jonathan, Eric triad, we pick different specializations. Jonathan runs the technical side, Eric does creative, and I do the other things, which is often paperwork, but also helping supervise production and design and so on. And so day to day, my work varies from checking in to see how each department's going, doing helping out with tax paperwork and so on, helping with league design, making sure things are on track, and basically, ideally, I'm able to find whatever we're doing badly and make sure that's fixed. But a lot of the time it means just working on the game, which is awesome. And especially close to release, I really have quite a lot of hands-on input in making sure that we can prioritize which things are important to get in for release and which things don't really matter.
Sure. What is that conversation like? How do you guys decide what the content updates are going to look like? Is that something that's planned months in advance, or is it, the league's about to end, we're pretty close with this thing that we want to put in, maybe this is what the next update is? What is that conversation like?
Typically, we have an idea at the end of one league what we're doing for the next one. At the moment, we have very vague ideas for the next couple, which is awesome to be in that position. But we want to make sure we can hit the ground running, that when 3.5.0 comes out this weekend, staff who aren't working on fixing small problems with it can start work on the next league on Monday, which means we get additional time to develop it compared to if we had to design it all after this one came out.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. You always got to keep looking forward. You mentioned 4.0 in 2020. Is that something that's already being worked on by a few people at the office in terms of the larger ideas of it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't talk in any specific detail about that, of course, because it's a long time before we start the actual marketing for it. But I suspect that if you're wanting to hear more about 4.0, the best place to hear that is XLCon next year, either by attending or by watching the streaming and stuff online, because that's the point where we announce it and we start to talk about what kind of stuff is actually going to be changed in that big expansion.
Sure, that makes sense. That makes sense.
And this expansion includes fishing, right?
This expansion includes a lot of things.
You almost got it, Sis. You almost got
One
it.
day.
It was
One
almost
day.
yeah. Okay, keep trying. Keep trying.
I will.
A lot of dev companies are out there, or dev houses are out there talking about, roadmaps and making public roadmaps so that the communities can kind of see stuff to come, even if it's just an idea. They know that it's being worked on. Is the idea of like a public roadmap something that you guys have ever considered, or is it just changing too much that you're a little bit afraid to put something up there because it might not actually happen in the end game?
Well, we certainly reserve the right to not do things if we think they're a bad idea. I mean, we plan things, get them done, and then think actually they didn't work and scrap it. And it's useful if it hasn't been announced at that point. It means we're not letting people down. With regard to public roadmaps, I kind of feel that a company that has to have a public roadmap is one that, is kind of like on daily report for its customers, if you see what I mean. There's been some incident with communication that have led them to promise some kind of roadmap. From our point of view, we know that our players can expect new content every 13 weeks. And because of that, as long as we are pretty clear with our signaling of what's happening in that 13-week cycle, it's not super critical for us to signal too many releases out.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just do you think it would quell the community at all in terms of like just you guys probably get a ton of tweets every single day about every single thing out there in terms of complaints and things that people want. Is it enough to warrant something like that, or are you just kind of not interested in doing anything like that whatsoever and just going to rely on responding to those people individually?
I suspect that it's better for us to address topics when we know it's something we're going to fix. Like, for example, earlier this year, we hinted pretty strongly there was a master's rework coming. And that way people know, if you're complaining about that, it has been heard, there are things happening, but we're not going to talk specifically about what that involves until the announcement of the respective expansion. And it's also partly because we don't really know, we know for our expansions in advance, we know what themes they have and what they're adding from an itemization point of view, what the content side of it is. But I don't know necessarily which expansion we're fixing, whatever community problem there's suddenly an important one to fix, right? Like if there's a topic like what came up this week, self-casting, for example. Mm-hmm. I personally haven't slotted self-casting into an expansion as part of the plan. Now I believe the team are probably going to address it in the next one, if address it is the right term, but we're not purposefully saying, we'll do this one 3 expansions from now. So in terms of a roadmap, it's pretty much a matter of trying to do everything we can that needs addressing for the next one.
Sure. I mean, you mentioned patch notes are live. They went live last night. We'll circle back and kind of let Ziz handle a lot of the specifics there, being the hardcore PoE player that he is. But how close to pushing those live are they? Like minutes before, are they set in stone? Is that when the green light is lit and you guys move forward with it, or are the patch notes kind of like a week in advance? Like, I guess what I'm asking is, what's the cutoff date for putting something into the patch?
So things go into the patch even after the notes are posted. Like, for example, we may wake up, go to work today, and decide we're going to change something, and then
don't change Arc, by the way.
Notes.
Just Arc's fine. You don't need to.
You're right. We forgot about that. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
So we do make changes after the patch notes. We try to update them, and of course, it's a difficult communication issue if we're changing afterwards because A, it looks retroactive based on feedback, and B, it's hard to actually get everyone. Like right now, the patch notes have been seen by a couple of 100,000 people, but getting it so that everyone understands a subsequent change is much harder to get visibility on that. One of the issues with the patch notes that people don't necessarily appreciate is that they are also translated into a whole bunch of languages. And so that's kind of the bottleneck before we can post them, where we have to have a ready to mostly translate version by last Friday in order to have the patch notes ready for posting yesterday. And so there's quite a lot of process that happens due to being in so many languages and regions.
Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many languages it's being translated into?
On our primary realm, we support Russian, Brazilian, Portuguese, French, German, and Spanish, and somewhat Thai. We're working on having more complete Thai translations, but thankfully a lot of Thai people can speak English, which is really helpful. And separately, we also have traditional and simplified Chinese versions, which are not run on our servers.
That's a lot. That's a lot of work. A lot of work for sure. by the way, Ziz and Zeke, feel free to jump in whenever. I don't want to dominate all the questions myself, but I'll just keep going until you stop me. So, by any means, feel free to jump in.
I'm just waiting to chime in with the meme questions.
The meme questions, okay.
Do you want the one right now?
Yeah. What's the
Chris?
meme? What's the meme question of the minute right now, Zeke?
If I said to you, Chris, Quill Rain, what would you say to that? Like just those two words.
The only thing that is in my head is someone walked into my office yesterday and said players are angry about something to do with Quill Rain, and I said, "Sec, I'm busy," and then never got back to them. So I don't know what the drama is. I haven't actually read the response to the patch notes yet. I've hired people to do that for me, but and the team are very competent at taking the feedback and then arguing about it and trying to make people happy.
I think actually, I don't know if Chris, you can't see the video feed on your end, but if you want to pull up the stream, there actually is a video of popular streamer Ziggy D just crying as soon as he realized that stuff was shown last night. So is that something that you like set aside time before the actual patch hits in terms of reading the patch note reaction, I guess, by the community?
I'd like to, but this cycle I'm probably too busy to. But that's okay. Other people handle it. I mean, it's just for my peace of mind that I try to read that and understand it. It's rare for me to actually personally intervene in balance-related stuff these days.
Makes sense. Ziz, were you gonna ask a question?
Well, I'm itching to get onto the statistic topic, but we can
Okay, all right.
slowly.
I have just a couple more questions about.
Yeah,
just
foreplay first, please.
Yeah,
Foreplay.
yeah. Then we'll just let you and Chris can just go into it with the whole statistic stuff. What are the patch meetings like, and how far in advance do those? Like when you sit down, when the balance team sits down, is that a month out from when you guys are looking to actually push the new update live? Is that 2 months out? Like, where do those conversations begin, I guess, and ultimately where do they end?
So due to the nature of the way that Path of Exile is pretty complicated, some of the changes, especially ones that we haven't done yet, require quite a lot of work, right? Like let's say we were going to make some like complete overhaul of some system to address community feedback on it. That might take months to do. And so we have a dedicated gameplay programmer, Mark, who handles very hard refactors like that, where he has to make one system behave differently without breaking any part of this million moving piece game. And so he's very good at that. And these refactors require quite a lot of thinking and considering everything. And so because of that, we try to, at the beginning of each cycle, identify a few specific big tasks that we want to address in that one, some of which will fail as experiments. Like we might say we're going to do these 3 refactors and one of them doesn't make it because it turns out to not work or be wrong, and the other ones do. And then there's, of course, much more focused small changes that happen towards the end. So someone will say, oh, I can fix this unique item by changing this number. That's okay. We don't need to plan that 3 months in advance. But we basically let the balance team make whatever changes are necessary to improve the game or the meta game, and then try to plan that so that we have enough QA time to make sure that we've tested all of those on a variety of characters and that we aren't, dumping them on the live realm without considering the consequences.
Are you guys looking at when it comes to the actual like balance of the game? Are you looking at general player data? Are you looking at the hardcore players, specific information? Like where does that information stem from to actually reinforce or ultimately like begin those changes? What are you guys looking at specifically on the balance team, if you can answer that?
There are a lot of different groups that we have to keep happy there. I mean, we can look at overall server information and say, like, hardcore players feel that the skill is garbage, but a lot of people are playing with it, and those people seem to be successful, and, there's really good player retention for people playing with that skill, so it's probably in a good place for casual players, and then we have to just signal to the advanced players that maybe it's not a shaper-viable skill. On the other hand, if there is actually something that's played with advanced players and they're having a rough time with it, then that's certainly something we have to address. And yeah, we look at a lot of stuff, and a lot of it's gut feeling, right? Is this skill working how we want it to as designers and players of the game? And if it isn't, we'll change it.
Sure.
In the past, you mentioned that you don't necessarily nerf or buff things depending on how strong or weak a skill is, but also about how many people are using it. Is that like still the case?
We have access to data of how many people are using it, but we have to be careful. And one of the things that I keep reminding people is if we have a situation where a lot of people are playing one particular build, that doesn't necessarily mean they're having a bad time. It's like that arc traps thing, right? People worked it out, they played it, we let it go for the whole league. People had a lot of fun doing that particular league. It was, certainly powerful, probably too powerful, but it was something people enjoyed. And these action RPGs are about getting to feel like a god, or at least kill a bunch of gods in the process.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense. Just don't nerf arc traps, and they're fine.
Yeah,
Totems, and
Arc's
it's
not
fine.
really powerful anymore,
Yeah,
so it doesn't need any
It's
further
good.
balancing.
It's in a good spot.
This
one
keeps
was-
coming up, so I'll have a word with some people about that today at work. I'm just kidding. We won't make any changes this close to the release. And plus, it's also important that we have a few skills that people know are going to be okay, so that if they don't want to think about new builds, they can at least play something reliable.
Sure. What is there such a thing as perfect balance in Path of Exile, or are you guys trying to patch influence the meta so that it keeps things interesting and kind of people do have, like you just said, those builds that they can kind of count on for most seasons to always be viable? Like, is perfect balance a thing, or how do you guys kind of approach that?
That's a good question. One thing to note is even if something is perfectly balanced, that doesn't necessarily mean we don't want to have variety over time. And when things aren't perfectly balanced, because of course there are going to be pros and cons, something can be 1% better, and as soon as the community identifies that, 60% of players shift over to playing it because it's the best thing. So you can get the balance almost there and still have the perception of unbalance. And therefore we basically just embrace the fact that the current, flavor of the month thing is going to vary a lot depending on a bunch of factors. And what we like to do is to make something strong, kind of downplay it a bit, watch the community freak out about how bad it is, and then they gradually realize it was actually decent.
I guess in some part the outrage culture can actually influence like patch changes, because I'm like the Quill Rain thing, for example. People are going pretty crazy right now on like Reddit and the forums and whatnot, but ultimately that will probably die down and people will start to tinker with it and maybe find another, I guess, solution to it. Is that kind of what you guys, to surmise what you said, is that kind of what you're going for? Is that people will react, then people won't use it, and then someone will go and try and start testing stuff out and see how it works out?
Well, whenever we change something, we still want it to have a very good build associated with it, right? Like, it isn't a case that we just say enough is enough, no more of this. If so, we do a rework to address it. Usually we say, okay, the build now requires a bit more finesse, maybe a bit more stuff going on, maybe a bit more player skill to use. And so they try to demonstrate how that skill now works. Hopefully almost as powerful as before, but built in a different way.
Ziz, what's that? We got to ask, what's the face?
a few of the changes in the patch notes include things like hard caps, which I'm very against. I don't know how you feel about this, but I don't like hard caps because I feel like it doesn't encourage the player to like think in a different way and do like further investment. Like, I think the case of me being most upset about this is, for example, Choir of the Storm, where now it's not really used that much anymore because now it's just 75% crit, and it doesn't really encourage the player actually investing into Lightning Rest, for example.
I don't know what's happened with those specific cases because I wasn't involved in that process, but the team do understand the role of diminishing returns as well. So if they chose a hard cap rather than diminishing returns for it, then that means that there was a specific reason for that. And I think if people are confused about why that is, I'll try to make sure people do communicate with those decisions. But they know there are several tools available for that, and they must have picked that for a reason.
It's like, are you good, Ziz? Are we good?
I did.
Okay, I know that was one thing you really wanted to talk about. You mentioned the idea of the community shifting 60% to a new skill. What, from the developer's perspective, where do you guys see the most influence coming from? Is it from YouTube videos? Is it from streamers? Like, what do you guys perceive to be the biggest shift on what people are playing in the game?
Those happen quite close together. If there is a YouTube video that pioneers something, suddenly Reddit's talking about it and people are playing it on streams. And it's very difficult to attribute it to, the genesis of who thought of that first. And so we kind of see it as a blob of the community who cares quickly, assimilate knowledge and spread it among them. And there's also the community who doesn't care so much, who like log in after work and don't actually read Reddit. Like, I've talked to Path of Exile players that have played thousands of hours and haven't read a Reddit post. They don't watch the YouTube videos they don't know who the streamers are. They just log in and play, and they're playing a totally different game in terms of the types of builds they're using and so on. It's fascinating.
Is the Mathel effect real, Chris? Is it a real thing?
I don't know what to say there.
Fair enough. I think that says everything, Chris. I think that says we don't need an actual answer for it. Yes.
Who? What?
So Mathis is a popular Mathis, I think is what's his name is. You're the
Mathil.
It's Mathil. It's Math. Okay. He's a streamer on Twitch who whenever he'll go and like look into a build and then the build the next day will just immediately skyrocket in terms of prices because everyone will swap over to it. And so the Mathil effect is
Not just that, but however, because people know that so many people will swap over to whenever he does a build, people will start chain buying up items.
yeah,
Makes it even worse.
it's kind of crazy.
See,
You mean even better,
that's
right?
actually
Yeah,
sorry.
even better. Yeah, exactly, Chris. A little better. What was that, Zeke?
Oh, that's something I can actually relate to as far as like a Magic the Gathering kind of a background. Like there's a few people you look to for deck builds and be like, that deck is probably going to be the fucking championship deck because this guy always makes the best decks.
Now,
Exactly, like the Saffron Olive effect, right?
it's happening. See, Zeke, I didn't tell you you can't talk about Magic around Chris. We got to keep him on focus here because he's just the biggest diehard Magic fan apparently.
Oh, really? When did you start, Chris?
Oh God.
Back and revised.
Hey, me too, baby. Yeah. Hell yeah. When I was using my fucking allowance to buy to not eat lunch, but to buy packs of cards.
Nice. This is the started during closed beta for Path of Exile type thing. There's that group of players who played just at the cusp of something becoming like pseudo popular, and then they're in a club that other people aren't.
All right, I'm sorry. All the PoE fans are gonna get pissed at me. I just wanted to like give you a high five real quick about Magic, and then we'll move on.
I'm sure we'll circle back to it towards the end. Ziz, it's stat stick time. Feel free to just go at it. This is your domain here. Where you want to take us?
How do you feel about Brightbeak being in stats? No, I'm kidding. So was there a lot of different options here for like different approaches? Because I feel like there's a very big contrast on how it was nerfed for spells and for how it was nerfed for melee. Where it's very, very strange. Because now you basically are going to end up with basically only having a prefix on some weapons because you still have to attack with that weapon now.
So I may not be the best person to discuss this with on our team because I've heard bits and pieces of people talking about it, but aside from trusting them, I haven't actually influenced the discussion. And one thing that's important to notice with the spells case is implicitly, if you're not like Diablo 3, for example, where your weapon you're holding is directly influencing your damage, then everything is a stat stick if you're casting spells because it's just improving the spell passively. And my understanding is that a lot of the problem there wasn't so much that stat sticks affect spells, but more that we introduced some incredibly powerful Shaper and Elder mods. And that was one of the things they were wanting to address in this patch, as well as preventing the situation where players are rewarded for having completely irrelevant items in the offhand while using skills that are ignoring them due to a quirk in the rules. I don't think this answer is going to make you happy. So I think the best thing to do might be that we find a way for you to talk to some of the developers who worked specifically on it, because they can do a better job justifying it and explaining it. But there's my view, at least.
Right, yeah. I mean, obviously you aren't like completely involved on everything that goes on, so that makes sense. Do you see? It's kind of hard to ask you a lot of these questions about statistics because you're not like fully involved. But they do like increase like physical based things like so much more than spell based things, which makes it like insane balance.
Yeah, I'm sorry for not having good answers for you. Normally, I would try to research something a lot more before going on the podcast so that I can make sure to represent the team's views. Like often going so far as to make sure they've written me a paragraph that I can read to you, including answers to specific questions and so on. But the problem is that with them being so busy, I figured, that dropping the ball on this one thing in terms of communication is better than having, that work not done for the release on Saturday. So, yeah, I'm sorry I can't give you good explanations on that. Having said that, when they're discussing this, everyone agrees with them internally, and it is kind of a consensus opinion. So, I do have full trust in the decision that was made there.
That's fair.
I guess to satiate the community a little bit, the idea of like two-handers and just melee in general being a focus, or I don't want to say being viable because it's always viable, but being a go-to choice maybe for a league. Is that something that you guys, is that just another like balance in shifting the meta? Is that something that you think could potentially come back? Because a lot of people look at like two-handed play and melee play right now and they're just like, why even bother? Is that something that worries you potentially, is maybe the best way to ask?
Well, I don't think they were intentionally trying to shift the meta using these particular changes, but It's worth noting that because we have so much content associated with every single type of meta, it is in our interest to make sure that various metas get attention over time. Because if you, let's say spells are best, so you play spells, and then the next league spells are best, so you play spells, and then we manage to make melee better, that means you'll suddenly discover all the melee stuff in Path of Exile, and it feels like a new game, even though all we did was a small change to make melee suddenly on top. And so we do want to make sure everything gets its time in the spotlight, but I'm pretty sure that the stat stick changes were not to cause this effect. They were to try to solve various problems that we've accumulated over time that kind of had to be solved together.
That makes sense. Ziz, any other patch note stuff that you want to bring up or ask Chris about?
I'm like surprisingly happy about a lot of things that people are complaining about. Like, for example, I think people are exaggerating about Colorblind because it's like a 1C unique. Shouldn't be the best endgame weapon. I think people are exaggerating a little bit.
Yeah, you hear that, Zig? Quit your bitching.
Yeah, just
It's
take a
because
long
people are
drink of
passionate,
that.
right? They're passionate about the game and they're passionate about the builds that they play. And everyone wants change, but at the same time they hate change. So the reactions are justified, right? And if we are failing to communicate some of the nature of the changes, then I think we do need to make sure that there's more explanation going to the patch notes so that people understand at least the goal we're trying to achieve with that.
I think Ziggy hates me now. The main thing I want to talk about is I feel like we've had it's a big part of the game for a very long time now. And from what we can see, the only way to get beyond now is to roll it on the actual map. So it's not on any of the Zana mods. There doesn't seem to be a Beyond Scarab. I'm scared.
I know you like Beyond, and that's awesome. So we're intentionally rotating stuff with designer mods. This is a place that this is a mechanism we can use to make each league feel different, right? Sometimes you're getting a bunch of experience by doing breaches. Sometimes it's by doing Beyond. Sometimes by other things. There are a lot of very experience-dense things in Path of Exile at the moment. Like, I'm not claiming that Delve is experience-dense, but you've got all of the Delve and Incursion stuff stacked up with the new Beastry stuff alongside the new league, and you get quite a bump of experience for interrogating these syndicate members, and that carries through to maps. And put it this way, I still feel it's too fast to get to 100 by like an order of magnitude, right? So, we're not addressing the experience thing in this patch because we understand that the goal of getting to 100 is kind of a thing that's, armchair players have kind of gradually got used to. Like, I'm having friends who, they've got young children, like, newly born infants who are getting to 100 in that league. And I'm thinking this isn't quite what we were aiming for initially. It was meant to be extreme bragging rights.
So would you what would, for your view of the game, what would be your ideal time to 100? Would it be back in the day when Havoc and Baker was hitting 100 and that took like a month or so?
Absolutely.
Or
However, that's not the reality of the game at the moment.
Right.
I'm not going to walk into the office today and say it's taking a month for the top players to get to 100 because that would make me the most unpopular person in our community.
Exactly.
But I do think it would be better that way. I should stress.
I see that.
Is creating, I guess, I don't want to say like time gating content like that because it's ultimately just time invested, but are there other things that you would want to see in Path of Exile that would take that long? In essence of like killing a boss or getting to a specific delve is obviously one thing where it's getting to a depth will take X amount of time. But are there other goals that could potentially occur in future updates where you can see them being, a month worth of investment? Is that something that you would want to see in the game down the line?
I think it's important that there are special things that can happen for players who play a lot because this has a couple of effects. If they are things that you do iteratively to approach like a high level, then that's something people can work very hard towards, and there can be a race that has a very clear, people are watching and seeing who can do it first. If it's things that occur randomly, which I understand can be frustrating if it's tied to a challenge, then very, very, very rare random events are cool because the everyday person can have it happen if they're lucky, finding Krillson, but with actual consequence, for example. And so those are all special moments for the community, either for streamers or for people watching the stream or for people who are playing the game and have them happen and get to tell their friends. And of course, there are pros and cons of all of this. If we want to avoid the, I guess, treadmill effect of just having a number that counts up repeatedly, and all you have to do is sink the hours in. That works for experience because it's how it works, but we do generally side with randomness for special events that occur relatively rarely. And there are certainly things in Betrayal that do not happen particularly often, right? It's a problem with Incursion, for example, was that you kind of see everything really fast. And that was cool. You get to enjoy the league. People loved Incursion, but it was terrible as a league in terms of player retention, right? That was this year. What was the failure? It wasn't Beastery, despite the fact that we had low approvals for that. It was Incursion due to the poor retention and the fact that we gave you all the content by the time you hit level 60 or so. Anyway, so we are conscious of the fact that that tying challenges to things that occur incredibly rarely isn't cool, because then someone can frustratingly get very close to their goal and they're just, at the whim of the dice to see when it actually happens. But it is important for us to have content that is randomness gated, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was very surprised about Incursion because it was so great. It's one of my favorite leagues. So I was very surprised that the retention was so low.
The mechanic itself was amazing. I love Incursion. We've discussed doing sequel leagues for it. There's all sorts of cool stuff there. It has a lot of awesome stuff going on. The problem is that we just designed a set of rooms and waitings on those rooms where you got to see them all. And the boss at the end of it was available for you to fight at level 15 or something like that. And so that's something we've done with Betrayal, is we've made sure that the final boss actually takes a bit of time to get to. And this concept of cycle time is interesting, because the cycle time of Talisman was 125 areas, right? Because you had to queue up your talisman. So every 125 instances you play through, you get to do Rigworld. The cycle time of Incursion was 11. And that meant that you get to see all the stuff every 11 areas or so. And we have a longer cycle time with Betrayal because we want to make sure that there's I guess it's two sets of nested cycles. There's the individual divisions that you're investigating. They have a cycle time more on par with Incursion, but then they're accumulating towards an overall larger goal. And when you complete that and get to fight the overall syndicate mastermind, then that resets your syndicate again. And so there's kind of two levels of cycle times there. We hit the Incursion one for rapid response and rewards, but we also have a much larger goal that's more in line with Talisman, or maybe slightly longer. You might see it when you get to maps, and then a whole bunch of maps later, for example. You'll do it several times during the league if you're a constant player. But that lets us hopefully achieve this, where we get rare content for people who play a lot, while also making sure to have a snappy cycle time to keep people engaged while they're playing through the story.
You brought up all, and I kind of want to touch on that because we put up a community thread, and that was probably one of the number one questions, was this idea of RNG gating bosses, and how a lot of the community didn't necessarily like it because they just never saw the boss all league long. Do you think, can I get you to say that it was too much RNG to see all, or are you okay with where it is? I'm curious what you think of, or if you even have the data for the amount of players that saw all across the league. Was it too much?
I think it was probably too rare, but okay. It's worth noting there are pros and cons for this. If you have, let's say there was a boss where the reward was you get some unique that you can't get anywhere else, and it's hard to find it, and it's just a rare drop. That's basically like a Skyforth or something, but you have to fight someone to get it. It occurs unpredictably. It's exciting to hope that it happens, and because it's not tied to a challenge, it's not mandatory to do it. It's just a thing that will happen, and then you're super lucky, and hopefully you can defeat it. I think that's really cool. I think that we made some small mistakes with regard to the challenges side of it, and giving the players the expectation that if they haven't encountered that rare boss, that they haven't, succeeded at the league, because that's outside their control. And these are lessons that we've made sure to, to take on board when designing challenges in the future.
Are those?
And how was?
Oh, go ahead, Ziz.
Carry on.
No, by all means.
How was Delve in comparison? Because that seemed to have really rare retention from the Twitch and our side of view.
Delve was almost as good as Beastery. And It's funny to say that. By the way, interesting thing. So I was going through our old April Fool's jokes because, we have to keep planning for the future. And I was reading the announcement of Path of Exile Royale. So we posted this on April 1st. And obviously the joke being that we actually did add the Royale mode, but, it looks like it was just a joke. And that thread on Reddit, which I would encourage people to read, has people saying, this one day is better than all of Beastery. Oh my God, Beastery was terrible, but this is good. And the meme at the time, the community thing, was people hated Beastery. It's like other popular things to hate at the moment in the gaming community. That was it. It was Beastery at the time for the Path of Exile community. But yet, looking back on it, everyone's like, we want Einhar. I miss the beasts. I miss beast crafting. and it had better retention than any other release this year. Like Delve was lucky to get close to B3 because there was so
Wow.
much stuff to do in it.
I
And so this
really-
is fascinating. I mean, having said that, there were still big problems. Like, I agree, it was bad on release, right? We failed. We needed to fix it. We learned a lot about development from that particular league. It was not a success, except on paper, which is very, very interesting to see.
Are the adjustments to stuff like the numbers, the RNG behind seeing something, a drop, a boss, a mob, whatever, are those adjustable without a full-on patch? Like, can you guys tweak numbers and stuff behind the scenes mid-league? Is that something that you do, or does it actually, like, does it have to be patched in, so to speak?
We have a saying that once players understand there is a knob somewhere, they want it to be turned.
Right.
So there are things in Path of Exile that have never been adjusted, and no one talks about them. And as soon as we tweak it slightly, suddenly all the discussion is about what value that thing should be. And so this is a tough question. I mean, obviously we can patch and change anything we want to in the game. Sometimes it's harder than others. Like, for example, in Delve, the bosses are spawned as part of your mine, and that means we have to change how mine generation works. And there's a lot of complexity that goes on with that. Obviously, in other leagues, when it's just a matter of, which unique am I finding or whatever, it's just changing a number. To some extent, we can do this without a restart. Like, it's useful for us to be able to tweak values. A big problem with the beast crafting stuff was in order to change the recipes, we had to basically restart the entire realm in some cases. And that meant when something was kind of abusive but not too bad going on, we had to save the fix for it for a few days until the next realm restart. Whereas we designed incursion specifically so that if there is a problem with a room being too common, we can make that room a lot less common. We never ended up using that tech, but we can emergency nerf a room if we had to without a restart.
This time around with Delve, there was quite a lot of drama around some people not being able to find prime resonators and things like seeds. Is this something that we'll avoid seeing in the future, or how have you guys dealt with it?
That's a good question. So this is a case where people trust Path of Exile seeding because the seeding has been correct and the game's been up for 6 years until the day that there was a problem with seeding, in which case everything is due to seeding. And I got so many emails, even from like literal coworkers, questioning the seeding of various things because, hey, I just tried to roll a 6 link and I tried 1,000 times and I didn't get it. Maybe my seed is bad or something. The way that I'll explain seeding really briefly so that technical people out there can understand what we're doing. You need to have when you're generating items and stuff in the game, we're using seeds that are shared between a whole lot of stuff, so that there's no way to do fancy random number manipulation and so on. It's a seed that you're not going to have any problems with because the instance is using it to like generate levels and generate items, and it's not with regard to any particular player. It's just a random number that was picked, and so there's no problem there because we don't need repeatable determinism for generating items for players. We don't have a case of replaying something and expecting the same results. So all the normal seeding for anything in Path of Exile is done in a completely normal, safe, tested, unabusable kind of way. The problem is when it comes to something like Delve, where we don't want to store, 1 million gigabytes of mine data for everything that people have explored. And so what we do is we use a concept like in, say, Minecraft, where there's a seed for the world and it generates the Delve mine from that. And so this means if you have the same seed as another player, you get the same mine. And that problem itself didn't occur, but the actual chests used a different seed, which was slightly buggy. And so the scope of the problem was that the chest seed was implemented in a way that wasn't correct. And so the chests got outcomes that were deterministic based on which player it was. And while normally most people had access to all the items, there were certainly some people in there whose seed was lucky and they got slightly better items, or unlucky and they missed out on the top ones. And in some cases, that had a pretty exaggerated effect. And we fixed it quite quickly after it was reported, but it caused people to suddenly start doubting seeding everywhere else, even though those areas are not possible to be wrong, if you see what I mean.
Right. And on a similar note as well, something that was very different in Delve was the way the fossil and wealth box respawn mechanic work, which seems like has been addressed in the patch notes. But on your side of things, on like the data side of things, do you feel like that like single-handedly massively changed the economy?
Are you talking about the darkness delving side of this?
Not necessarily just darkness delving, but for example, if you find one nice delve and don't destroy any walls and just run the same one over and over again. For instance, I was able to, and this was after a lot of people were doing it, I was able to make like a stable 400 chaos an hour.
Uh-oh, you're banned. You're out.
So our goal there was that it was rewarding to explore areas that you have actually completed beforehand. We didn't want to have it so these things were just derelict, empty zones that you've completely depleted.
Right.
And this did mean that there were various side effects. So if you find one that's got a particularly good layout, potentially, while the results from it are random, it's very fast for you to get to them. And this is because we didn't want to take the fun away from Darkness Delving mostly, right? That was a supported thing. We preferred to let the league run its course. Sure, maybe some people who are smart and work out the good strategies manage to make better economic profits, but that's honestly what Path of Exile is all about, and those people are winning by doing it. And then we would address it in the next patch. And I believe the changes that have been made here help that to a large degree. We still want Darkness Delving to be possible. We still want it to be very rewarding content, but maybe not to the extent that it was.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I want to jump over to kind of the new player onboarding type topic. Do you happen to have data, or is it something that you guys track for when a player logs in, sees the game, and then opens the passive skill tree, and if they quit out or continue on? Like, is that a decent barrier of entry, do you think, for new players, Chris?
They actually have a higher chance of quitting if they don't open the passive skill tree. You'll see what I mean.
I believe it. It's a daunting thing. There's a compilations of streamers opening it and reacting for the first time as well. So, but continue. You're gonna say something.
So we have a lot of data about our early game, and we have data about other free-to-play games that they've either provided publicly or privately to us. And a lot of people quit free-to-play games, right? Like 70% of people who load a free-to-play game are not going to play that game, regardless of what game it is or how much effort they've put in, unless it's Hearthstone. Like it's really a thing that people bail out. And the same thing's true. Like I've got phone games that I've launched and I got to the loading screen and then I quit it and I never ran it again. And that's not going to look good in their statistics when 60% of people do that.
Right.
So there is quite a high degree of users quit because, wait, this is, an action RPG. I didn't want one. I wanted a MOBA or something like that. It just isn't for them, or various problems occurred. So we have a rate of like half our players historically have not got to Brutus, right? That's a rate that initially completely astounded me, that 50% of people can't make it to the prison. But that's actually good that 50% of people did try the game that far. So free-to-play games just have really, really, really poor player retention at the start. And we have added, 15 times now increased tutorialization and stuff going on. We've revamped the early passive tree, so instead of 5 choices at a time, you're getting like 2. There's so much stuff. There's little videos. There's all sorts of things. And our tutorial is mostly a soft touch approach where it only shows you to do something if you demonstratively fail at doing it. Like if you get really low on life without ever touching a flask, it'll explain flasks to you. So ideally, the pro players aren't really aware that the tutorial's there. But we've done all of this, and it has never budged our early player retention numbers. And so when talking to the Warframe people, they say exactly the same thing. Regardless of what changes they make to the early game, the same rate of people stick with it. And that's just because those are people who are going to give it a shot and learn to play the game. And for those people, it's not a particularly difficult game to get into. And for the people who don't want to try, they're probably never going to like it.
So you think it's more of a case just, it has nothing to do what developers throw at a player. It's just the idea if the player's going to play it themselves, regardless of what's happening in the actual game. Like you guys basically are saying you can't influence it at all.
We will still try to make the game as accessible as possible, right? Regardless of this pessimistic theory we've got here, we'll still go through and make stuff like, Betrayal's a complicated league, right? Betrayal has a lot of stuff going on, and we're trying very hard to explain how it all works so it's clear for players and they don't get confused. And we will keep trying, regardless of the pessimistic attitude of it doesn't matter what we do, people are going to play it if they like it. Obviously, we'll keep pushing to make it easier. And I mean, one of the things we want to streamline in the future is the early game experience and make sure that at least the first few areas are much easier for new players to get into, because it's the right thing to do. For people when they're getting their friends involved and that kind of stuff. But I'm not really expecting it to shift the numbers in a meaningful way. It's not one of those things where we double our revenue. It's like, congrats, you made 1% more money,
Right.
So,
No, go ahead, Ziz.
oh, okay. Well, while we were talking about free to play, there's 2 things I want to bring out. So obviously, you guys are funded quite a bit by supporter packs and stuff like that, but we haven't seen the larger supporter packs for a while. And I don't know if you've seen, but quite a lot of people have been saying that they do want them. Is the choice behind none of the big supporter packs that you guys are mostly getting so much funded by the smaller ones that you don't need to? Or what's the reasoning behind having none of the large ones at the moment?
They're ready to go. I'm just trying to make sure that we have the physical goods, like, more ready before we launch them. We've got some stuff that requires longer lead times, like there's hoodies in the $240 pack this time, and we're really excited about that. But I was waiting until after the league launches, where we let it cool down for a few days or a week or something, and then launch the packs. And in the meantime,
awesome.
we're just making sure we've got production going on all the physical goods. There's t-shirts and hoodies, I think, this time around, and I think maybe some signed art for just the top tier. Anyway, there's some really cool stuff. Yeah, it's a full set of supporter packs at the price points you're used to. It goes up to $480 and so on. So it's ready to go, and the armor sets are amazing as usual. It's pretty much what you expect, but with our new high quality we've been doing, as of this year, and so we're excited about that, but aren't ready to launch them just yet.
And will that be coming during Betrayal or for the next league?
During Betrayal, like in a week or two.
Okay.
Nice.
And to elaborate on that, I mean, you keep seeing things on Reddit, like people are making their own, not like merch, but like Path of Exile related items. You see loads of people saying, "Oh my god, I wish I could buy this." Have you guys considered opening something like a merch store where people could buy like maybe just a t-shirt? Because sometimes people don't necessarily want to use like $280 or whatever to get a t-shirt, but they really want a t-shirt for example, like somewhere like $20 to $50 or a keychain, stuff like that. There's a large demand for this thing by players.
Yes, this is absolutely on our radar, and my honest timeline I have here at the moment is we're experimenting with selling merchandise directly for the first time with the XLCon stuff, and we're not 100% sure what to do with regard to the greater community, because there's a lot of infrastructure required to post stuff, and I'd have to make sure to hire separate staff to handle that so that we're not consuming the time of any of our developers or administrative people or customer support and so on. And so our current rough plan is we're going to experiment with buying different types of merchandise. There'll be really cool stuff for sale at XLCon, and it'll be something like either we sell the stuff at XLCon and sell the remainder afterwards, or we sell the stuff at XLCon and make the XLCon stuff exclusive to XLCon and sell it at another convention later if we don't sell out, or we launch the merch store at around the same time with a different set of stuff or some of the same stuff. We're still working on it and trying to understand, like, there's pros and cons to exclusivity, there's pros and cons to launching the merch store beforehand. But it's a big undertaking and it requires quite a lot of infrastructure changes. And so because we have to make merchandise for XLCon, due to the fact that that's a really popular thing at conventions that people expect, and it's a cool way to celebrate having gone to it, I suspect that with that much merchandise floating around, we will either be able to sell that merchandise to the players or make it exclusive and have the expertise to sell them other cool stuff instead.
Do you foresee a problem with if Mathel buys something that you'll instantly sell out of that?
The Mathel effect.
That's my retirement planning right there.
Very smart. Also, Chris, I know a guy, canvas bags, don't fuck with them. All right. I'm just saying, be careful with the canvas bags. All right.
Okay.
All right. Just want to...
So I do have another question regarding free to play. So back in like 2012, 2013, we had 4 stash tabs that everybody got for free. The problem is that it's now 2018, and there's still 4 stash tabs that everybody gets for free. But now we have div cards, we have prophecies, we have essences, we have delve, we have fossils, we have resonators. There's so much more stuff in the game now, and like especially like a lot of my audience are some from like poorer regions like Russia and Brazil, and they can't necessarily afford to buy additional stash tabs. But that's been the same now for 4 or 5 years. Have you guys considered getting maybe 1 or 2 additional free stash tabs for everybody, and for example something like half a premium tab to encourage people to, sure, maybe you should buy one, but...
It's a good question. This isn't something that we've brought up discussion of recently. I should note that while Path of Exile is often like mocked for having $42 armor skins and so on, we've tried to price the stash tabs very affordably. You can get regular ones for a couple of dollars, or even less when they're on sale. And so for regions that these are priced with poorer regions in mind as a price sensitive thing, that we haven't made it so all the stash tabs are blindingly expensive. But yeah, I take your point about new players requiring more space than they did before. It's worth discussing, though no promises.
Something I was considering, or as a suggestion that I talked about on my stream, was something like a limited currency tab, similar to the way the current currency tab, the current normal tab works now, where you have an upgrade feature. So say, for example, a limited currency tab where you can maybe only put like 50 or 100 of each thing in it, but that would give people a little bit more. And then, if they have enough money and they can upgrade.
Cool. Yeah, good idea. I'll talk to the team.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea at all. Just a small taste of what you can get capped at some sort of number that just makes sense. I think that's a pretty good idea.
I had one.
Yeah, go ahead, because I got to figure out how I
Okay.
want to phrase this next one.
While you work this out.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of fielding questions from different sources and different people that know a lot more about this. So I'm not going to pretend like I know anything about this. I'm just trying to get some of the community voice in here. But someone asked me, you're introducing new ailments that you kind of teased at, like scorch, bone chill, sapped. Like, is there anything you can tell the watcher, the viewers out there about that, or is that like something you got to keep under your hat?
I don't actually know anything about them myself. Like, I found out from the news as well. Like, seriously, I'll look at Reddit and see the post, probably after a lot of the people who are listening. This cycle has involved me being very much focused on betrayal and not so much focused on the additional stuff that we've added. Basically, if it was covered in our press tour, those are the things I know. Like, I can talk about Winter Orb for a long time, but I do not know anything about what Bone Chill is, which is fascinating and actually a lot of fun. I get to enjoy the game as a player does due to this.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is a good lesson for anybody who's out there watching. It's kind of, you kind of forget how many people are behind the things you love. You know, you can't just point at one person and go, that person knows everything, so they're to thank and to blame for everything. Right. You know, you can't put it all on, you know, Chris's head, because he doesn't have, like, everything doesn't go through, you know, just one person.
Yeah. Zeke, you've actually uncovered why being a community manager is an awful position sometimes at game development, because you become the focal point, and it just sucks when you take all of that nonstop.
Yeah. So if you guys want to know about the new ailments, don't ask Chris.
Yeah,
right?
ask Bex in chat. That's who you should.
There you go.
Yeah, Bex has a responsibility to understand this stuff, and she does a good job with that.
Did you have a chance to personally play Delve? Like, did you get time?
You talking to me?
No, Chris.
Oh yeah.
I only played on our test servers. Like, as soon as Delve was released, it's planning and making Betrayal. Yeah. And this will be the same thing, right? Like, the schedule is tight over the holiday season because, you know, people are taking time off and so on, and we don't want to slip our schedule. And we're aware of what happened last holiday season with regard to scheduling, where Beastry was honestly low on time and that affected its quality. And so we're making sure that 360 hits the ground running with development. And so I'd like to play Betrayal on the live realm, and I'm kind of making up for it this week with the amount of playtesting I'm doing and tweaking. And then, you know, I've seen the Betrayal content quite a lot by now. And so I'll probably skip playing it on the live realm and instead focus on making 360 as good as we can.
Makes sense. All right, I've workshopped the question, so I'm going to go with this. I think everyone's pretty tired of being asked if they have a phone, so we're just going to skip over that. But there was some commentary out there coming from you guys about 4.0 being created to kind of compete with Diablo 4. Can you explain what competing with means when it's from a feature and standpoint? Like, what? Not asking you to say what do you need to compete with Diablo, but what is it that you guys think needs to be improved on for the game to, you know, be out in 4.0? And does that make sense? Like, what else is out there, I guess, that you guys want to push forward for something like 4.0?
So I believe the thing that Jonathan was specifically referring to that is this philosophy we have internally where Path of Exile is a game that's been in development since 2006. That means we started work on assets in 2006 and 7 that are still in the game in their current form. And that meant that those assets were developed probably before some of the assets that made it into Diablo 3 that we used. And so we're an evolving game, and Path of Exile is not there's never a Path of Exile 2, right? Like, I can state that unequivocally. We are improving Path of Exile to become 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? I mean, you could argue we're already on Path of Exile 3 at the moment. And so this game will continue to evolve because we don't want to say to people, there's a new game, go play that. Also, you have to rebuy your micros. That kind of stuff is garbage. You know, we shouldn't. Right, so Path of Exile will evolve, and because of this, we have to make sure that its quality is consistent. Because if a new big game, like, you know, a potential Diablo sequel or something comes out, and people play it, and it's obviously going to have insane, like, you know, 2021 level, you know, quality and so on. If that comes out, and our game has stuff made in 2009 sitting in the first couple of areas, then, you know, our game is going to look bad in comparison. And so what we're talking about with competing with other games is making sure that Path of Exile feels like a modern game. And that means consistent level of quality throughout it, right? It means, we've been revamping assets. We've been, it's no secret that we're working on new character models. And we're basically replacing parts of Path of Exile so that they perform as well as possible and they look as good as possible and that it has the best feature set as possible. And that's what we talk about with competition, where we just want to make it so that as a cohesive whole, Path of Exile is a game which, if we were to release it as Path of Exile 2, people would be happy with.
Okay, fair enough. And I think some of the Tencent news we can move into that because I'm sure that's affecting a lot of stuff for 4.0 and any future updates. But can you talk about some of the things that have already been made possible just from the Tencent, not purchase, but investment earlier this year that maybe players are not aware of yet?
There's a little bit of misconception with this because it isn't the case that our content is being paid for by our parent company. We're still paying for our content using the supporter packs that people are buying.
Right.
The company has financial and operational freedom where, just like before, we get income and we spend it on making the game better, and we still call the shots as to what makes the game better. Like, no one asks me what we're working on or wants to, give us advice on how we change that. And that's awesome because it means it can have no impact on the community. But no impact on the community cuts both ways. It means we're still making Path of Exile using the resources we had before. We need people to keep buying supporter packs. And so we're scaling up how awesome things are because Path of Exile is doing better. We've launched on Xbox, we're launching on PS4, we've launched in China. These things are helping Path of Exile earn more money and let us do bigger things. But they're somewhat unrelated to the fact that we now have a parent company. That's good for stability and safety reasons. It means no one's going to sue us because, Tencent's one of the largest companies in the world. It's great because it means that we're not gambling with money that would otherwise, be our retirement money potentially. It means we can take a step back and say what is best for the game rather than, I don't want to make that because I would otherwise spend that money on more magic cards. Now I don't need to make that decision. I can do what's right for the game and for the community and for the company without it directly affecting my bank account in exactly the same way as before. And that is like playing poker if you're staked, if you see what I mean. It means you can focus on the game, to use the poker analogy, rather than freak out about the fact you just lost $300 in 2 minutes.
I feel like Captain America. I got that reference. I know what that means. That poker, like being staked in poker. I know what that means.
So is the change then, I guess, at the company and kind of the feeling around the company is just less stress, or is it more stress after something like that? Where
no one's really even thinking about it. I mean, obviously people know, but it's not something that's really discussed, right? It's companies have parent companies, they have investors. No one was questioning what the composition of investors was before, and sure, it's changed, but development goes on, and I don't see any impact as far as the community or company goes, honestly. Like, everyone's just taking the news really well. I mean, sure, on announcement day, there was certainly some discussion on Reddit that we expected, but since then, the game has continued to improve in quality. We've kept doing what we're doing, and enough time has passed now that hopefully people realize it wasn't just us flushing out our queue of what we had available. I mean, we're continuing to make stuff exactly the same way as before.
I guess to kind of jump back a little bit to new players and just things to keep people invested in the game and actually inside the game window itself, is that something that you guys want to facilitate, or do you not necessarily mind people constantly alt tabbing to go look at a build planner so that they can see what passive skills to take, etc.? Or is that something that you guys would want to bring into the game to where you can have Ziz's new Cyclone build or whatever kind of loaded onto your passive skill tree so that you can follow along with that as a new player who's not necessarily sure what the fuck they're doing to begin with? Do you think you should keep that in game, or is that something that should be outside of the game?
So we did this. There's a build planner where you can load builds and see it on the passive tree, but it's not enabled on production. And this is partly because we did it and then, it wasn't quite finished. And so we turned it off, and really should turn that on again sometime. So I'll think about getting that in for 3.6.0. It is kind of a thing that's a bit of an understated feature. Like, it works and you can load the build, but it's not exactly some kind of crazy thing where it's playing you videos of the build guide as you're going through the game and that kind of stuff. It's kind of just there so you can see what passives you should be picking. And to some extent, it's kind of slipped out of our knowledge because it got disabled in our internal clients, so we can't see it anymore. But yeah, that should be brushed off and released. I'm sure it'll be helpful for players. And in terms of the philosophy of in-game versus out-of-game, I mean, I'm 100% happy with people alt-tabbing, but the problem is on other platforms like console, for example, where it's much harder to go and flick out to a web browser. You need to use like a phone or something like that. And we all have phones, but it's it's a chore having to do that while you're playing on console. So that's why having more stuff in-game helps those players out.
Speaking of third-party clients, there's always going to be a lot of controversy around logout macros, but the last time we spoke, you guys mentioned that something like that would be considered to be put in-game, like a feature to actually log out quicker with a hotkey. Is that something you're still looking at?
Yes, just not done yet.
Okay.
I like the subtle smile a little bit there. It's after the question is good.
We have a lot of stuff to do, and content comes first, right? Like it'll be nice to stop right now and spend a few weeks getting some things in, but we've got to release Betrayal this weekend, and that means focusing on stuff to make to improve it as much as possible.
Yeah. Right. It was a topic I wanted to bring up when we were talking about 4.0 and stuff earlier. I believe I heard it referred to as a Giga expansion. Am I right?
Yeah, I might have said mega expansion. I think you might be conflating it 1,000 times higher, but sure. What's 1,000 times between friends?
Right, exactly. However, generally, you guys don't exaggerate a lot, and now you're like doing a convention, and obviously, there's already quite a bit of hype around 4.0. How much larger than other expansions and content updates in like a percent thing, I guess, would like 4.0 be compared to, say, for instance, Delve or Betrayal?
Don't get your hopes up too much. 4.0 is a big expansion, but it's of the same scope as what you're used to with Path of Exile updates. It's going to be awesome. We have a lot of cool stuff we're planning, but I mean, like for example, when you look at 3.0, 3.0 introduced a bunch more game content and various other stuff like that, but it didn't actually influence the core game overly much. Like it introduced the Pantheon system. That kind of didn't go anywhere. 2.0 introduced duels. That was kind of the only major thing. To some extent, we're doing more with expansions like Betrayal than we do on the major 0.00 ones. Now, that's something I'd like to change. I want it so that 4.0 has systems changes that are impactful and makes the game feel fresh and causes, and mixes things up a bit in ways that will improve the game. But, it's worth noting that we're developing it alongside our existing content schedule. So every time we make a league, we do a bit of work on 4.0. And this continues, like we're targeting 2020, as I mentioned, for release. And so it'll be really good by the point it's released. But do manage expectations with 4.0, because it would really suck if we put a lot of work into making something big and awesome, and then everyone's like, what? I thought it was 1,000 new acts or something silly like that, right? An act takes a very long time to make. And we do have a lot of quality levels. We do have high quality levels where people have expressed concern at, some of the Act 6 through 10 stuff feels a bit long and drawn out. And, we want to make sure that we've got the game being tight. And this doesn't mean that 4.0 contains a new act. It contains new content of some type that you guys will see. But, 10 acts is already a lot. Why would we want to add to that? And so I'm being purposefully coy and contradicting the truth here in a way that confuses people so that they do not know what to expect and you can't manipulate these words. Well, there is stuff in 4.0, and it's going to be good stuff, but manage your expectations. It's still a long way out. We'll be much clearer at ExileCon next year. You'll get a chance to see it and see the scope and hopefully play it.
I do want to trap you, though, because you said new acts. So can we expect new acts? Is that something that you guys are working on? is there more than 10 acts?
At least one. You can expect there is at least one new game area that a person can enter, which looks different than a current one.
Okay, good answer. Thanks. Good answer.
Nice
field.
But Delve had that, right?
Yeah. When can we expect any announcements on ExileCon, like tickets and like time frame stuff?
We are ready to launch ticket sales soon. It's just that Betrayal has been taking up all of our time. But our intention is to start ticket sales imminently, like this month, maybe next month at latest. So, nice. Yeah, it's we're targeting the weekend in the middle of November. I think it's 15th and 16th of November 2019. But we're going to be launching a page where people can buy tickets, and we'll explain the benefits of coming to New Zealand and experiencing the con and getting a chance to look around all the local tourism stuff, like see where they filmed Lord of the Rings and that kind of stuff. And our goal is that for players who can afford to travel all this way to New Zealand to go to the con, it's hopefully the chance for the once-in-a-lifetime trip where they can bring their wife and have a look around the country during the summer here as well.
Another thing I was wondering as well was about your perfectly in-date First of April joke. Is that something you guys are still looking at, like doing more with the Royale? Because obviously that was hugely popular.
Yeah, I'm keen to do more with it. It's just a matter of development time. I mean, we have plans of how we want to brush it off and improve it. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but we're under no illusions that, that's going to suddenly be the thing that's making us tons of money. Realistically, it's a fun thing for the community to play, but it's also basically mostly unmonetized thing as well, right? It's not something you need to buy stash tabs for. Maybe people will buy cosmetic micros, but honestly, our community already have quite a lot of those with regard to their, to dress up with in Royale. So it is something which is kind of on the back burner that we'd like to break out one day. The whole theory of like release a Royale game and make a ton of money isn't true anymore because there are 100 of those getting released a week.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to kind of shift to community questions. We collected a bunch from Reddit, so we'll give you guys some time. And Zeke, I know you wanted to ask one in particular, so we'll let you start off here.
Yeah, I don't know if you have an answer for this because there's a lot of moving parts, but Tower Beast wanted to know: is there any plans to better accommodate colorblind players in the future?
I would like to, yeah. That's a thing that comes up often, and it's easy to accidentally ignore that subgroup of players because, many of our leads don't happen to have color blindness, but some of our other developers do and give us feedback, at least how it affects them. And that is something that we've experimented with in the past. Like there've certainly been many iterations of colorblind awareness changes, but clearly if people are still complaining about it, then they are not sufficient. So that is something that I want to make sure that we take into account more in the future with new content.
Cool.
Okay. I feel like it should be like I should read the rest of it just real quick. Re-rolling socket colors on gear is a pain. I'm red-green colorblind, and all the red sockets are slightly darker than green ones, and Vorchi is a godsend. It still takes me longer to check the colors and socket gems appropriately. The new Syndicate screen with the color-coded relationship lines, important information for manipulating our Syndicate encounters, looks like it'll be a nightmare for red-green colorblind players. I just wanted to get the specifics out to make sure that
of course
someone hears it.
Yeah.
What I'll try to do if we get time is to have it so that if you hover over a red relationship line, then it says this member hates this member, and ditto for green with trusts. And that way, hey, I could get to explain betrayal on the podcast this way. I'll make sure that there's a key so that you can hover over the actual string and see what the relationship specifically is.
Nice. Bronze is saying he'd be interested to know, now that the master rework is going in on Friday, Chris, what you feel is the weakest part of the game, or things that you guys want to improve on in the future when it comes to like the systems within the game that exist already.
This is tricky because we've both said we'll fix what we think the weakest thing is, and we've said that if we have a system we want to fix, we'll try to get it in the next thing. And this is an expectations issue where either you're asking me to announce the next content, or you're asking me to say something that makes people think that's the next content, and then they get upset when it's not that. So I don't know. I mean, the stuff that we're addressing in 3.6.0 is stuff like, the self-casting balance stuff that people want us to make changes to, as well as another awesome league, which will be cool and people will enjoy it. I don't think that we have any firm decided on plans for what the next immediate goal for addressing Path of Exile's deficiencies are. I mean, we have a whole bunch of, stuff that we've identified to change over the longer term, like in 4.0, but I do not think we're rushing into like replacing masters again in the short term or something like that.
Gotcha.
The next one is by Jerkanius/CycloneSB, and he's asking, MTX dressing room when, or perhaps an MTX mannequin that you can equip your character's MTX or actual in-game items onto for display in the hideout.
We have planned that mannequin thing where you can basically have some, suits of armor that you can dress up with your spare sets. Though it's worth noting that our intention with that was that you're using your spare micros to dress up stuff in your hideout rather than having a dressing room to experiment with unpurchased micros. Like at this stage, we're not planning to have it so that you can see what unpurchased things would look like on your character. Now, this isn't because we're, greedily capitalistic here. It's mostly because it's very hard to implement and there's a lot of work that would go into it and we never get time. But I think the mannequin thing is probably closer.
In terms of MTX, what I guess is, in the same line of what I was asking about when it comes to the patch notes and how those things are decided, is the idea of going outside of just buying, new auras or new gear, etc., from the MTX? Are there other areas that you guys could offer things for in the MTX section that potentially haven't been thought about? Kind of like the mannequin type stuff that, you guys are exploring, not necessarily stuff that's going to come. Obviously, I can't ask you that, but just other things within the MTX realm that you think would work in a place like Path of Exile.
We have various ideas for more visual stuff, and an example of something we're discussing is the concept of like theming how your stash looks, which means other people will see it in your hideout and you see it in towns and so on and so on. That's a relatively minor cosmetic thing, but some people want it. We have stuff planned for hideouts. Now, traditionally, we haven't made a lot of money from selling hideout decorations. Some people buy them, most people don't.
Right.
And so we have capacity to sell hideout tile sets now. Now, this isn't something we're doing in 3.5.0. We've made all of the ones we've designed so far free. You can find them in the game. It's worth noting the ones and maps are meant to be insanely hard to find. So none of this, I couldn't get it in a week, therefore, the game is bad kind of stuff. They're meant to be very long-term, special secret goals kind of. So the point is that you can unlock cool tile sets currently completely for free, that we will be selling some in the future. And there's discussion of like, what if you can make teleporters inside your hideout or special switches and that kind of stuff? And those things are probably going to get sold so we can raise a bit of money to cover development of them. But it's mostly incremental improvements of trying to add more stuff like that. We don't have a crazy new idea for a new type of visual microtransaction that we're on the cusp of releasing. Having said that, feedback is always appreciated. So
Sure.
If the community have any visual stuff that they want to see that doesn't have any pay-to-win aspects, please suggest it. If enough people like it, we'll definitely get it done.
As someone who has purchased a lot of MTX, will say duplicate items are somewhat of a nuisance, I guess is how I'll phrase it. Is there anything that can be done or anything that should be done to alleviate the idea of duplicate items? Or is that just kind of an issue of, hey, you're buying a loot box and that's a thing that can happen?
So with the changes to how the microtransaction stuff works in the last year so that there isn't a big messy stash with everything, and the duplicates get in the way and confuse things, that's helped the presentation aspect. Now, if you've got 15 copies of the gloves, it's just a number that you'd rather be one. And to some extent, the fact that there are duplicates in the mystery boxes is priced into how they work. And we could consider changing it so there aren't. But honestly, if there's like $80 of stuff in a set of boxes and you're going to not get duplicates, we kind of have to charge you $80 ish to open them, whereas at the moment we can charge you $3 for something that could contain a $20 or $30 thing because of the chance of getting duplicates. And that means like the first box you buy is definitely, if you like all the microtransactions evenly, the first box you buy is amazing value, the second box is still pretty good value, the third box is still great, and so on. And it's only after you start opening like a dozen or so boxes that you start to run into duplicates being a thing, and that's the price that people choose to pay for completing those particular sets months ahead of when other people get access to them. And I do think we can improve the mystery box system over time. I'm hesitant to do so without a lot of thought, because what we have at the moment is, people understand it. We do not feel it's manipulative because people have a chance to just buy stuff when it comes out in the store later on. Honestly, mystery boxes are a very unpopular thing in the gaming community. So we kind of feel that if we were changing it, we'd have to be very careful with what changes we made to make sure we aren't accidentally opening a new can of worms with a new thing there to hurt some people.
Right.
Having said that, there are ideas for duplicates. Like an example that we've kicked around, and this is not a promise, is to have maybe a bar that goes up as you destroy duplicate items, and you get special rewards once you reach certain thresholds. Like maybe you get like a, scrap golem pet or that kind of thing if you've scrapped enough duplicates. These are just ideas. That's not a promise. I mean, people like or don't like it depending on who you ask.
Right.
But we are cognizant of the fact that people are accumulating duplicates at the moment, that is priced into how the boxes work.
Yeah, I think the whole loot box thing is, you said can of worms. I think that kind of fits it almost to a T. It's just it's a thing within the gaming world, I guess, and now kind of opening up into the real world with government coming in and kind of putting their stamp on it or not putting it on it, so to speak. So I don't want to spend too much time on that because obviously you can't speak to it from a company perspective. But Ziz, you want to ask something?
Yeah, can I do a quick follow-up on the MTX? Gifting MTX to players is something a lot of players aren't currently aware that you can do by emailing support. Have you guys looked into like streamlining this, where you can actually, through the website, gift, for example, like a $60 pack or even points to other people?
So it's worth noting that when you're gifting, you're buying packs on behalf of other people. Like if I open 2 mystery boxes and I get 2 pairs of gloves and I write to support saying, I'm angry I got a second pair of gloves, give it to my friend, they're not going to say you can do that. But if I say it's Christmas and I want to buy a $60 pack for my buddy because he loves Path of Exile, then the only check they do there is making sure that it doesn't look like he's arranged some kind of, dude, I'll give you 40 exalts if you buy me that $60 pack, right? There's a lot of checks to make sure that that hasn't been arranged. But aside from checking to make sure we're not facilitating RMT, it's generally okay to buy supporter packs for other people. Now, I agree that's something we could improve on the website at some stage to try to make more automatic, and then we just have support come in later and review it to make sure there wasn't any RMT going on. But it's honestly quite a lot of work for something that I don't necessarily know people that engage with particularly heavily over what we have at the moment. Like, it's somewhat common knowledge. There are a lot of people who write in asking for gifting, and arranging that with support. So it will help to have it automated, but we have a lot of other web projects like, that merchandise store, for example, and a few other things that we do need to work on at some point.
Zeke, did you have a question from the chat? I know you've been kind of perusing it throughout the show, so.
Yeah. I've been going in and out. Let's see. This question is, I want to say from Quadra 1X, something like that.
That's his name, yeah.
Said, do you any chance of PoE and getting something like adventure mode? Like in D3?
I don't think we like how that works. I think it's important for a player to play through the story, and I understand, that it's a long game to get through the maps, and a lot of people would wish that process is streamlined, which is, as a side note, one of the reasons why it's quite easy to get pretty powerful builds these days using rewards you get from leagues. Like, there's a reason why BS3 was handing out uniques so much, and so on, Incursion was so gifty, and so on. It helps people on, who know what they're doing get to maps more quickly. But we do feel it's important that you can actually play through the cohesive story, because right now I see people playing Diablo 3, for example, and not really engaging with its story due to the fact that they can skip around areas and play the best area to get to level 70 before they do rifts. There's less of actually playing through the game going on, and we want to make sure that people do play through Path of Exile's story. It's important for character development, you get all your skill gems and so on, and it's also important to actually experience the game.
With kind of this D3 weird refugee thing that's happened with all the news that kind of came out of BlizzCon this year, is that something that you guys are thinking about internally for ways to grow your own game, in the sense of how can we keep players that necessarily aren't in the Path of Exile ecosystem but want to be, by perhaps easing them in a sense of what they came from? Does that make sense?
We have never discussed adding any features from our competitors in that way. So, yeah, there wasn't really any thought that went into that. It's more a matter of, oh, cool, that's great. We've got these new players. Let's hope they enjoy the game. We didn't want to add features from other games. Sure. I don't think our established community would take very kindly to that. And there are reasons why we've done things differently. The points of difference with Path of Exile are intentional ones. Let's just say that.
Sure, that makes sense. I know we've kept you much longer than we had originally planned, so I appreciate you sticking around for that. So we'll kind of wrap up and do final questions around here. Ziz, you want to start us off, and anything you want to ask Chris before we let him go?
I think I've asked all the questions. I got everything I wanted in. It was great.
Cool. Zeke, for you, anything you want to ask Chris before we let him go?
I mean, there's one. I guess I have one last community question, if we got time. Ribelust asked, or Ribelust said, please ask if there's any point in the game they have a system where the game actively increases a player's chance to drop some item currency over time after each attempt.
We do not have any de-randomization stuff in the game like that, except for with evasion. There is an entropy system where if a monster evades too many hits, it will gradually, converge on getting a hit in to spread that out. Or is it the other way around? If you get hit too many times, your evasion goes up. One of those two. But that's the spread out evasion stuff. We do not have anything that affects item drops. There's nothing that tracks what you found and adjusts the drops in the future.
Gotcha.
I'll let chat out my question then, since chat really curious about helmet chance.
Do the helmet
Is that
chance.
something you are looking to changing? Maybe letting players choose, for example, 3 instead? Stuff.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I missed what it was about.
So Helmet chance from Izara's Labyrinth. Obviously there's more and more skills coming in the game. Have you guys looked into maybe letting players choose between, for example, 3 enchants, things like that, or changing the system at all?
I haven't heard any discussion of that, but I'm sure following the podcast, because everyone listens to it, they will certainly be discussing that as soon as they get a moment.
Makes sense. What would be my final question? I guess removing it from the game specifically and and just kind of more focused on you, Chris. What does Friday look like for you once the game's launched? Once you're at home, do you jump in and play, or do you sit back and have a drink and try not to think about the game for a little while before going back in the next day and fixing everything that messed up on launch?
Wow, I wish it worked like that. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to walk you through from. Okay, so at the end of Friday, because New Zealand time, Friday is our Thursday. So
Right.
So imagine it's midnight on Friday evening our time. The servers are going to go down in 6 hours. They're coming up in 9, right? So it's midnight. There's still going to be people at the office. People rarely do a lot of overtime, but around the couple of days around release, it's certainly a thing. And so a lot of people at the office, we're getting our last minute changes in. We've got a candidate build uploaded. Like if we needed to, we could deploy that one, but there's some typo fixes and there's like this weird crash with a new skill or whatever. And so we're working on that, and our issue list is down to 7 things left to fix. And there's, this is the point where there's people enjoying playing Betrayal on a pretty final version, and they'll find like a couple of weird things they want fixed. So they'll come to me and say, "Oh, Chris, I reckon you should tweak the number of this. People are going to get too many uniques from blah." Side note, Betrayal has insane rewards. Anyway, you'll see what I mean in a few days.
Uh-oh.
So, there's a lot of secret stuff we just haven't announced for the reward system. It's
all right. You're hyping it up too much. Look, 4.0 is going to be great, Chris. Let's just get there first. We got to get to 3.6. Continue,
it's
please.
worth hyping up the Betrayal rewards.
Okay.
Anyway, so point is, though, there'll be tweaks. Some guy will say, "Look, I've managed to somehow get a headhunter in 20 minutes, every 20 minutes, and we'll fix that." And, this...
Okay.
This continues until about 2 a.m., where at that point I'm saying to people, "Hey guys, A, try to get some sleep because we've got to be up in a few hours, and B, I need to start this final upload." So I do the final upload, set it going, and at that point I fall asleep on my couch, setting an alarm for every half an hour to check the upload. And when it's finished, I actually get to sleep. And at 5 a.m., we take the servers down, and Bex takes over doing community stuff. I fall asleep until 8 a.m. when the servers come up. And then the game is launched, and this is where the fun starts, because there could be all sorts of fun issues, right? For a start, what are we doing about server capacity? I mean, our numbers indicate that we're going to set insane server capacity records for Path of Exile, right? So we pre-ordered a ton of servers, which backfires horribly if they were unnecessary, because that's expensive. But we pre-ordered way more servers, like 50% more than any previous release, including 3.0. Because that's honestly what the traffic is saying. Like if you look at how many people are reading about Path of Exile online today, it's 50% higher than it ever has been due to a recent influx of players. So we have all the users flood into the servers, and hopefully nothing goes wrong. And then the bug reports start coming in, and then we have to triage this. And this is the case of someone's like, "There's a weird text problem." We're like, "Okay, that's fine. Someone fixed that. I guess it goes in a patch tomorrow." And then someone goes, "Okay, it crashes if you use the skill in this area under these circumstances." So we're like, "Okay, that needs fixing. How many people does it affect?" And then suddenly, "Hey, wait, everyone has this problem if you do blah. The such and such encounter isn't working for this guy." And we're like, "How did that get through?" "Okay, fix that now." And we deploy fixes over and over and over and over to these problems that really only are noticeable if you have millions of players hammering away at the game. And that's what the first weekend looks like, right? We take turns sleeping. There's constant patches going out to address it, and that's assuming, that the guy that was DDoSing us doesn't come back, right? There's a whole lot of... we have mitigation for that now, of course. So
Sure.
But either way, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong on launch weekend.
What?
Have you had the servers blessed this time?
Oh, yeah. Good
We
question.
bless the servers, but it's becoming less effective over time.
Yeah, those blesses, you gotta keep them up to date for sure. What a good launch? What is a good launch within the company? Servers stay up, or
Our servers generally have stayed up for the last few, and we often have some small teething problems of some type, as often there's a bug with the way the queue works, or some file that wasn't set up correctly in the patch or something like that, and affects a few people. But realistically, most people can play, and ideally, there just aren't any show-stopping problems. There's a bunch of small bugs, ideally no economic bugs. There was some stuff in Bestiary with item splitting and stuff that caused some drama in the community because it allowed faster gain of certain types of items than we would normally allow that we had to fix. And so on and so on. So, I mean, there's some scope for that. Betrayal's rewards are pretty wacky, and so we have to keep a very close eye on making sure that people haven't found ways to abuse it more than is reasonable. And yeah, I'm hoping a good launch is that there's no showstoppers, no critical economy bugs, and people have a great time playing it. And we will make sure that happens, right? The launches always go well because of the fact we have such a good team working on it and making sure that everything goes great. But it isn't a case of us pressing launch and going home and then coming in the next day to play it. It is a very, very long launch weekend.
Yeah, ever since Brandis, there's been really impressive launches. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, we don't want to keep you any longer because you got to obviously launch that game in about 48 hours. What anything you want to close out on? Anything you want to say to the community? Shout out, anything like that?
I think you guys will really enjoy Betrayal, and I'm hoping to get some awesome feedback after you've played it. It's a very complicated league, but it's one that's worth sinking your teeth into. And my advice on how to play it is basically go along with the ride, listen to what the characters are saying, make decisions of what betrayals and bargains to do based on what you feel is right. And over time, you will learn how the league works. I recommend not really treating it like a board game and diving in at the first, in the first day, trying to work out exactly how to micromanage all the rules. You'll get that over time. But it's a very character-driven league, and I think you'll enjoy learning a lot about a cast of 19 characters in Path of Exile.
Awesome.
As well as getting those crazy rewards that I talked about.
Yeah, of course. That's the goal. That's the whole goal of Path of Exile, Chris. The lures. You just got to get the fat loots, man.
Well, we've specifically not spoiled many of the rewards because there's going to be the WTF moments going on stream when people encounter like some crazy thing and say, "What even is this? What? This is crazy." And we're just going to be sitting there with popcorn waiting for that to happen.
You're speaking my language, Chris. I like it. I like it. All right, we're going to get out of here. Take a quick break. We'll let Chris go and then come back and finish up with another half of Drop Frames. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on this episode, and good luck with everything this weekend with the launch of the new league.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. We will be right back.
Chris.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Drop Frames right after this. We'll see you then.